Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us at the BPCG Gardeners Question Time for Saturday, the 4th of July. I hear a rumour that the pubs are open, so thank you for choosing to, to be here with us this afternoon. I am really excited about this afternoon's guest. I'm delighted to welcome Nemone Mercer from Core Landscapes. Core Landscapes transforms vacant land in deprived urban areas into hubs for community engagement through horticulture, design, workshops and events. I think this is a subject that is probably close to the hearts of lots and lots of people that volunteer at BPCG. So I'm going to stop waffling and just give the floor straight away to Nemone, who has got a presentation to show us. Over to you, Nemone. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Joshua. Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing okay today and you're not in the pub, so well done for that. Yeah, my name's Nemone. I am the manager at Core Landscapes Community Garden and Plant Nursery. I've been the manager for Core Landscapes for about 7 years, I think. And during that time, I have managed 4 different sites within 3 different boroughs and approximately about 2 years at each site. So basically, Core Landscapes takes a vacant bit of land that nobody is using. It's generally in areas that are going in periods of regeneration. So where you have large areas of land that are basically all the buildings have been demolished and you're left with these sites that are just boarded up, nobody can get to them, there's no access there, they're kind of just hot spots for undesirable behaviour. So what Meanwhile projects do is go into those sites, open them up and create green resources for the local community. And we're part of Core Arts, which is a large mental health charity based in Hackney that has been around for 27 years. So when we go into a new site, I'm working with local people, but also people that have come via Core Arts through mental health and social services routes. And the idea is that by being part of a project, by completely transforming a site into an urban oasis, that is improving everybody's mental health and well-being and really boosting people's confidence and upskilling people, showing people all the different types of jobs that you can do in the green sector. So it's really kind of just giving everybody the opportunity to get involved in gardening. And yeah, so basically, Meanwhile projects make a community asset into a land that would otherwise just be being ignored. And the opportunities for people to engage in gardening primarily as a source of self-care is kind of at the forefront of my work. So I'm assuming you're all gardeners, and as gardeners we all know that being out in the garden, looking after plants, creating nice spaces is a way of looking after ourselves as well. It's a reciprocal relationship between the garden and the person. So obviously in a community setting, you've also got the massive support around you as well, and that social interaction. So you can't really avoid helping yourself to recover and get over whatever issues you're experiencing, or learning ways that you can manage your mental health and well-being when you're not on the site. So being able to use those skills at home, whether you're gardening on a balcony or windowsill gardening or container growing anywhere, it's these lifelong skills that you've then got for the rest of your life. So here, this image is one of the sites that we had in Canning Town. So this was actually the second site. So typically, a Meanwhile project will be faced with a site similar to this that is quite unsafe often. There's glass, there's needles, there's bits of wire, there's all sorts of things. So our first thing obviously is to go in and make that area safe, which we often do with large groups of community volunteers and corporate volunteers. So our approach has always been to upcycle and recycle everything. So in this image, you see that we've got big, thick rolls of black felt matting, which was actually upcycled from I think one of the Chelsea gardens many moons ago. And so we spread out, we swipe through the site, we clear all the rubbish away, and then we lay this felt matting down and get huge deliveries of bark chippings, which we then put over the top, and that basically creates the kind of the groundwork for the rest of the project. And we don't have any buildings exactly, but we have our shacks. and we have our shipping containers. So when we're moving from site to site, these move with us. But currently on the roof garden that I'm in now in Hackney, the bottom left image, which is the only building that we've got, or the only undercover thing that we've got on the roof now, is that bottom left shack, which doubles up as an office, a tea break place, and an indoor working area. So we can fit about 8 people in there at a squeeze. I'm just going to go back a bit just to backtrack. How we get the land is generally a real combination of lots of different stakeholders, so depending on what borough we're in. So when we were in Canning Town, we worked very closely with Newham Local Authority and the GLA, who are the landowners. We also work with Newham Regen a lot, and then obviously all the general trust funders that all the community gardens work with, so people like the City Bridge Trust. We've always been able to generate about 1/4 to 1/3 of our income through CSR, and that's working with corporate groups, plant sales and training, and the rest is through referral routes and grant funding. In Whitechapel, it was a really interesting site because we were right next door to the Royal London Hospital. So that was like a 3-way split between Tower Hamlets Public Health, Barts, the Royal London Hospital, and the Whitechapel Vision Delivery team. So that was all of us coming together to, it was Tower Hamlets Public Health that identified the land in the first place, and then we worked very closely with all of those 3 different avenues to get access to the site. It was quite a slow process, that site. There was quite a lot of toing and froing between whether they were going to give us that site or another site nearby. So that whole process did take about a year for us before we actually got the site. So we were at a point where we were going to be kicked off our site in Canning Town. We didn't quite have the other site lined up, so there was that period of uncertainty, but it all came to fruition, luckily, and we created our lovely Whitechapel site, which I'll show you in a bit. So let's go on to, so when we start a new site, obviously we're now in our 4th site, our 4th location, so we've learned a lot from each site as to what works, what doesn't work, but we're very much steered by whatever local environment that we're working in, so what the needs are in that particular community and what they want to get from the site. Also, it depends hugely how big our site is. So in Canning Town and Whitechapel, our sites were pretty big. The second Canning Town site was massive. So what we were doing on that site is very different from the site that we're doing on now, which is much smaller in Hackney. The Canning Town sites, we had a big area that we could use for community food growing, so people could have their own plot, their little container. So as you see in the one that's getting the tree planted in now, local people would have that size bed to grow their own food in. So that is that's before Canning Town, and this is some after pictures of Canning Town. So everything is container grown on our sites because we have to be able to move around, and we have developed our containers over the years to make them more practical to be moving and also to retain as much water as possible. So the container that you see right in the middle of this picture was our sort of first model of containers, which is, I don't know if you can see it in that image, but the next to it you can see that there's a pallet, the container's sitting on a pallet, and that's obviously so the forklifts can come in, move the beds, put them onto a flatbed and drive them off. But we don't really use timber beds anymore. What we now use are plastic bowsers that have been cut down so that they're rigid and they don't biodegrade, and they can carry on being moved from site to site. And we don't use the wooden pallets underneath, we only use the plastic ones for that reason as well. And obviously we're not buying any new stuff, this is all upcycled, recycled plastic. The bottom left-hand picture, that is, we try and kind of link with as many different partner organisations as well. So that one was a workshop on tree grafting that was done by the Orchard Project a few years back. And we'll kind of link with local herbalists or any other organisation that we think people would be interested in working with, or people have asked us to link up to do particular workshops. So this is more of the Canning Town. So you see the bottom left hand, so that's part of the food growing, the community food growing allotment space. And that site was big, so we could have lots of events there, lots of opportunities of volunteering and learning about horticulture. Throughout the year, I run horticulture workshops, so we cover a particular area of horticulture each week. And if people volunteer with us, we spend quite a bit of time trying to find out why people want to volunteer, so that whatever they're doing on the project is very much focused on their particular area of interest. So whether they want to grow food, or they're interested in medicinal planting or planting garden design, there's always like loads of different areas going on, so that we can adapt and accommodate what people want to learn about, and indeed pull on people's own experiences as well. So obviously no one gardener knows everything about gardening, so if we get volunteers in that might have a particular area of interest, we'll very much bring that into the project. And that's a really nice way of keeping the project kind of alive and vital. It's always changing, it's always adapting, there's always something new that we're trying out. It's great. This is more images of the Canning Town site. So the top right hand corner was our lovely polytunnel, which I do have to admit missing hugely now that I'm on the roof. We had the Canning Town site and the Whitechapel site, because they were big sites, we had the capacity to have quite a large community plant nursery. So we would be propagating like 99% of all of the stuff that we were selling. It was stuff that we were growing on ourselves, going from seed, taking out of cuttings. So obviously that was a really good opportunity for people to learn about all those different areas of horticulture. Currently on the roof, we still are doing that, but it's sort of gone, it's very much more focused space. Yeah, just some images of some of the people that we were working with. So yeah, that the bottom right hand group of people, all of his head's got covered over. This was like the original group of volunteers at the Canning Town site. They kind of helped get the whole thing off the ground. And this is the before photo of part of the site at Whitechapel. So the Royal London is sort of, it would be behind us, as if you're looking at this image. So this site was pretty straightforward to move into, because there wasn't too much stuff to clear at the beginning. But you see at the back there's a lot of buddleia, and around the other side there was quite a lot of grass and glass, and I'm not sure if we found any needles there, but we did have to do a kind of clear swipe through it. And then that is after. So this was a really gorgeous site, because we had the church on the one side and the hospital on the other side, which had a really nice sort of old versus new architecture going on, and it created a really I would say sheltered, but actually we were in a bit of a wind tunnel there, but had a very nice feeling about it, very nice atmosphere about it. And we've always had ponds in our projects, and obviously because meanwhile they've had to be raised up off the ground, but still they're absolutely full of loads of wildlife, and people always seem to really respond really nicely to water. And that's the polytunnel to the left there, which was just before it had the plastic put on top of it. So this is more of the Whitechapel site. So again, we could have events there. We had all our apple trees. The top right-hand picture, behind those people was our movable community orchard. So they're all like apple and pear trees that we're growing in big containers. And it was very much about showcasing that you can pretty much grow anything in a container if it's a big enough container, and you've sorted out your soil management and you've sorted out your irrigation, and obviously you're thinking about the aspect and all the rest of it, but that you can pretty much grow anything, anywhere, to create any kind of space that you want. So it's very much about empowering people with that knowledge that you don't have to have a traditional back garden space to be able to create a garden. So this is where we currently are. So this was taken, it's on a wide angle lens, so it does look a bit distorted, but yeah, this was taken summer last year. So we moved from our lovely Whitechapel site about a year ago, actually. It was around about this time last year. And the blue building that you see on the left-hand side, that is the edge of Core Arts. So this is a slightly different environment for us, because it is sort of semi-permanent, although there are plans that we might be moving up higher, but we're not under the auspices of a third party, because Core Arts owns this building. So there's that security that we haven't had up till now. And if you see at the far end of this photo on the left-hand side, that little bit of roof garden was what was there already. And then what Core Arts did was construct this area in the foreground, and we've made a bridge across the two sections. So we've had to condense all the different elements from those really big sites into a very, very much smaller site, which has actually been really positive, because it's really made us focus in on what the key elements are of the project. And a lot of people only have a very small amount of space, so if we can cram loads and loads of stuff into this roof garden, again, we're kind of showing and empowering people that, you know, they can do the same whatever space you've got, however small it is. You could still fit a lot of plants in them. And this, yeah, these are more pictures of the roof garden as it is today. I'll just see if I've got a wider one. Yeah, so the image at the bottom is the reverse of the image that I've just shown you. So you can sort of see that there's two sections of the roof with a bridge joining them, and then the top right hand one is showing it from more from the angle of the first one, if you see what I mean. So we've got in the top, I can't really show you with my hands, but the top right hand one is where we've got our kind of teaching area, and we've also got this beautiful space, which is the street level garden that is just down below from the roof garden, round the corner. And this has always been the Core Arts members garden, but we were faced with that. So when we first moved there last summer, this is what we had to work with. And this is like one half of it. And we had a small grant from the groundwork stream. I can't remember the name of the grant, but we had like £7 grand something. So we reused a lot of old timber, and a lot of that money was spent on getting the compost in, getting some more plants in. And so between that and that is less than a year, which I think is pretty brilliant. We've had, I don't know head count, we've had between 200 and 250 people involved in creating this space. And what's been really lovely with working with this space and our roof garden space is obviously we've got two very, very different aspects to work with. So although the spaces are quite small, we have got that range of aspect and conditions, so that when we're looking at what plants to grow where and why you would choose which plants, you've got that lovely contrast between the two spaces. So obviously on the roof, we're growing a lot of drought tolerant stuff, a lot of Mediterranean things, and in the shady gardens, much more native stuff, I guess, and concentrating on leaf colour and texture. And then we've got all the little annuals and perennials for the bees and the other beneficial insects. And on both sites, we're always thinking about wildlife as well as people. So we're always thinking about how we can create those habitats. I haven't got a picture of it here, but just around the other side of this one, we've got a little pond that is now finally at ground level, which is much better obviously for the frogs and toads. And we have got another pond that is raised up in this garden as well. And so ironic that we've just got it like, and then we had lockdown. I think we'll open again. So this is the Core Arts Members Garden. The left-hand side, we've got, there's one little sun trap bit. So in that area, this is quite an early photo actually, but we've got a lot more sun-loving things in that corner as well. And so where we are, if ever you're in East London, the nearest overland is Homerton Station, and we're like literally 5 minutes walk from the station. And if you're interested in getting more information about us, there's our website. We've been, over lockdown, we've been making, as a lot of other people, a lot of films. I think we've got about 30 films now that I've been doing, one of our community gardeners has been doing, and our volunteer, and our patron Mark Lane from Gardeners World TV. So there's a real eclectic mixture of films there that is open access, so you can access those Vimeo films either via our website or by that Vimeo link. And we've got our Instagram page and our Facebook page, so we update lots of things on there. And currently we are just in the process now of slowly reopening the gardens for some of our regular volunteers and students. So I think it's the case with a lot of community gardens, just doing it very slowly and taking our time with it, getting all the safety protocols in place, figuring out how many people we can work in each site safely, looking at where the pinch points are physically, and yeah, navigating through all that. But so far so good. People have been able to either walk or cycle into the garden, and it's just been so lovely the last week or so having people back into the space, because a community garden is really not a community garden without lots of people in it. So yeah, it's been lovely having people back, and that's pretty much what I've got. If
well, first of all, thank you. I mean, some of those transformations are just, yeah, staggering. It must be incredibly satisfying, sort of looking at those before and after photographs and sort of seeing the change. I have a ton of questions, if you wouldn't mind, and then I suspect that other participants will also have questions too, but we're going to do mine first. Okay. So you describe these as meanwhile sites. Yeah. So the implication is that they are always going to be temporary, you know, in sort of medium to long term. Do you have, when you begin these projects on the sites, do you have any sort of understanding of how long these spaces are going to last, you know, yes, once you transform them, or is it just you know, we're going to do it and we'll see how it goes? We have to have some kind of time frame, because yeah, it is it's obviously logistically, if you're moving from a big site to another big site, it's a lot of work. You know, so it takes quite a long time, and there are some things that you have to spend money on. So you have to spend money on the vehicles that you need to transport things. So it really isn't worth having a space for less than 2 years, really. It takes about maybe 2 or 3 months to kind of set one up, assuming that you've already got quite a lot of the plant infrastructure in place. I mean, I know other meanwhile projects have done it in a slightly different way. I don't know if any of you know the nomadic gardens that were in just off Brick Lane, which was another quite a hugely successful meanwhile project. They've since had to leave that site. But yeah, depending on what the organisation is, depending on how much money you've got to set one up, depending on how many people that you've got, it's not really viable to have one for less than about 2 years. Okay. And you said that, so some of the sites have been, I mean, obviously there's the one that's right next to the Core Arts building. And you did actually mention one in the presentation as to how you came to it, but like, how have there been other ways that the sites have been kind of identified to you? Like, how is it you choose these spaces in the first place? Or is that something that sort of councils approach you with, or is it more local residents?
Yeah, real mixture. So the very, very first site in Canning Town, it was a landscape architect company, Fabric, who identified the site, and who then approached Core Arts about doing something collaboratively together with that site. And then this was before I was in post, but then they worked with Newham Regen, and yeah, the Newham local authority to make that site work. The second site was GLA. So I believe that Core Arts had gone to the GLA to identify some land in that area. They'd come back with, you know, a map of possible sites and a map of wrecking and seeing which was the most suitable. The one in Tower Hamlets was identified by Tower Hamlets Public Health. One of the locality managers there was aware of the site and just thought, well, that would be, she knew that we were leaving the Canning Town site, and so she was the sort of catalyst to get that all working. And then obviously the one that we're on now is owned by Core Arts. But since we've moved to the one in Hackney, I did have about 3 different organisations approach me with other sites in London, but they were too late. So
right.
But yeah, there's no sort of one size fits all with this. It's very much where you happen to be, what's going on in that area at any particular time, who's in post in you know, local government, who your advocates are, who can kind of vouch for you, and who kind of gets it with the green infrastructure that we so badly need in London for community projects.
That leads quite neatly onto my next question, I guess, which is, I just wanted to ask about sort of what are the biggest challenges for doing something like this? So imagine you're starting a new project, perhaps what are the biggest challenges you would expect to face, both from a horticultural perspective, you know, the practicalities of the site itself and the work that you do, but also in the lead up to, you know, being allowed to break ground, as it were?
I think probably the biggest challenge is the amount of time that it can take to get a project, to get a site that is unfunded time. So, you know, you get the funding for the work that you're delivering, but you don't get funding for the time it takes to find a site. So all of that kind of work has to be absorbed into your current workload that you've got funding for, because it can be quite bureaucratic, and it can be, you know, we all think from where we're sitting that it's a no-brainer. There's an empty site, there's people that want to do something with it, let's just do it. But obviously in the real world it doesn't quite happen as quickly as you would like it to. So that is probably the biggest challenge in that respect. From a plant point of view, I guess the biggest challenge with moving around is that you're having to fit your plants into sites or places that, you know, if you've got something really established in a really nice way on one site and then you're having to move it to another site, all the conditions are going to be a bit different. So you have to grow a lot of plants that are very adaptable, basically, and plants that are very resilient and tough, which is a good thing really in the world of community horticulture, because that is our palette. You know, we're not growing hugely fussy or delicate or sensitive plants. You know, they're like real doers that will, you know, you'll get a lot out of. I guess the hardest thing for the people that we work with is the attachment people have on a particular site and a particular way that we're working, and then you're having to change it. So that can be quite hard for some people, but we always kind of remind people that it's as much about the experience that you've gained from being part of the project and the knowledge that you've learned, which you have then got, and that is the point, really, the ultimate point of the project, not the actual physical space itself. And that experience and that learning is transferable to wherever you're, if people are still attached to the project and we're moving around, or whether they've moved on to another project. And we very much hope that wherever we leave, that there's some kind of legacy that the powers that be have seen the value of that green space for the time that we're there. So although we have to move on, they've seen that the community and that people really, really value and appreciate and get a lot from having us been there. And ultimately, we hope that that means that when the local authorities are looking at developing new areas, that they are thinking about the green infrastructure all the time, and that is, you know, it has to be kind of in the forefront of planning.
Do you see a lot of community transference between sites? I appreciate that some of these, you know, most of these are East London based, but like, you know, the same volunteers, the same people, the same, you know, participants and users, do they kind of follow the sites when they move?
We have got some volunteers that have been with us from the very, very first site.
That's great.
Which is amazing. I think they're like really, they're so committed and wonderful, and they've been a real anchor to the whole project. But obviously, wherever we are, we're then pulling in new people from that local space as well. So it's a real mixture of both. And I think it's probably fair to say that with a lot of the community growing projects across London, there's always a mixture of people that have been there or attached to the project and will stay with the project sort of year after year after year after year. And then there's another sort of whole cohort of people that are passing through or using it as a stepping stone to vocational work, or then they leave London or move house, whatever. So you always have these sort of two levels of your anchor people and then your other people sort of passing through, which is great, because it keeps it all kind of alive, and all the different people that pass through, obviously they're all bringing new things to the project as well. People have always got new friendships to make. So I think that side of it can be really positive.
That sounds amazing. So I asked about challenges. I'd like to ask about rewards. It looks like just from looking at the photos, I think I suspect I know how rewarding it is, and I can guess at a few things, but I wanted to ask you personally about kind of what you think the most rewarding part of the project is for you. It's
definitely being able to share my passion for gardening and plants. That is the biggest. I think for anybody that is doing a job that they love, and then they're being able to pass on the thing that they love to other people, I don't think you can really have any more of a rewarding job than that, basically. And I think I get as much from working with all the different people personally as they do from coming to the project. It's a very reciprocal between me and them, between us and the plants and the garden. It's all, you know, we're all part of the same way of thinking and appreciation for the spaces that we're creating and that we're helping to look after, and just being able to put a smile on people's faces if they're, you know, coming up to look at the project. Or, and now with the roof garden, we're spilling it over to the edge, so it will eventually be sort of hanging down walls, and we'll be doing the streets a bit and the tree pits, so kind of spilling out from that site. You know, people walking past, looking up, saying how beautiful it is. It's just hugely rewarding to share that passion. And then I suppose on a more serious note, knowing that these sort of projects can have a profound impact on people's lives. You know, for people who are experiencing mental distress, the difference between, you know, a state of mind that they may come in with to when they're actually in the garden space and how they're going home, you know, that difference is so huge. To have a job that is making that much difference for people is, it's just really nice.
Amazing. I promise I'm going to run out of questions soon, other participants, but not quite yet. How did you, I mean, we talked very, very briefly about the start of your career with Core Landscapes, but how did you get into doing this? Like, was this just a project that kind of dropped into your lap, or was this something that you kind of wanted? Yeah, I'm going to stop waffling, but yeah, how did you get into Core Landscapes in the first place?
So basically, I used to work in the film and TV industry, but I've always been a gardener ever since, you know, knee high to a grass, you know, since the age of 2 or something. And when I had my family, I sort of struggled for a bit, tried to carry on working in the film industry, really wasn't working with a family. And I just thought, oh God, what else can I do? I thought, well, gardening's the only other passion that I've ever had in life. So I started getting my qualifications, getting RHS qualifications, all the rest of it. And I set up a project in my children's nursery school. So there was a playground, there was like one raised planter in there. And I said, oh, have you got a gardening group? They were like, no, why don't you set one up? So that sort of, I kind of by default ended up getting into garden design, and designed it, got that built, learned how to write funding bids, got that underway, and I actually worked there for 8 years, I think it was, alongside Core Landscapes for a while. And I also volunteered at other community gardens. So I volunteered at St Mary's Secret Garden in Hackney for about 6 months. And I volunteered at King Henry's Walk Garden in Hackney as well, part of the garden classroom there. And I also worked for what is now the Social Farms and Gardens, which used to be the Federation of City Farms and Community Gardens, which has since changed its name. So that job was very much about supporting other projects and being part of a network. And then, yeah, then the Core Landscapes job came up, which was primarily, to begin with, it was City Bridge funding money to support other projects, not to actually run this one, but to support other projects. So I did that and then kind of got more hands-on with managing this one. And then the other work kind of fell away, and this one became kind of my main job. So, but it's been because we've been moving around, it's like it's a new job every couple of years.
Yeah.
A whole new set of things that you're navigating. So, which is good for me because I don't get a chance to get complacent about anything.
I mean, new challenges, new parameters and stuff, it sounds fulfilling in itself, right? A change is as good as the rest often.
Yeah.
So last set of questions for me. I am on my way to work, say, in my local area, and I walk past every day what I think would qualify as a meanwhile space, with the caveat, obviously, that, not all of those spaces are, for bureaucratic reasons or for whatever reason, are eligible for a transformation like this. What should I do? How do I begin? Do you have any advice for anyone that has got a meanwhile space, an urban space close to their, in their lives, and is thinking something should happen here and I would like to be the catalyst for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing, obviously, is to identify who the landowner is. Second thing would be to write a sheet of A4 as to what your kind of plan for the space would be. Very, very simple sort of bullet points, so you've got something you can take to the landowner and say, look, I've got this idea, I want to do this, something very short, punchy. And then probably the most critical thing is, before you even do any of that, to look around that site as to other organisations and projects that are already working in that neighbourhood, and speak to them first, so that you're not, that you're not treading on any toes, but B, the more people who are behind an idea, the stronger that idea will be. So whatever borough you're in London, there's always going to be a lot of projects on your doorstep that you may not know about. So yeah, go to see those projects, go and speak to people, get that community buy-in to that site. Okay,
thanks very much. That's everything that I have. If there are other participants on the Zoom call, if they have any questions, now is the time to unmute yourself and ask. We'll do that awkward waiting thing for like 15 seconds and see if silence reigns. Anita, yeah, please ask.
Hello, thanks ever so much for such an optimistic, hopeful, gorgeously illustrated talk. It was so lovely.
Well said.
Yeah, no, it's just, that's why I tuned in. I'm a sucker for things like this. It's just amazing. I have two questions, one very tiny local one and one a little bit broader. So, for example, in my road, there are lots of tree pits that are basically just dog toilets at the moment and need a bit of love. But my local council says that the current advice is not to plant in that soil. Maybe it will take away from the tree. I don't know. So is there anything I can do that won't endanger the tree? That's my question.
So basically, what you can do is, if you get some scaffold or decking board and just make an edge to it, And then on the inside of that, put some plastic so it goes from the inside of the timber down into the soil a bit, so that when you are watering it, that water is going down and not under the timber. Make the corners really solid, because they will get kicked and knocked and all the rest of it. And then when you put in the new soil, you put it in a kind of with a well, so that you're not planting up against the actual tree itself. So if you're raising the soil level up against the tree, that the trunk can no longer breathe, so that can damage it. So from a horticultural point of view, the council's totally right. It's not ideal to plant right up against the tree, but we live in a city and we need to have as many green spaces planted up as possible. So I'm always of the take in that actually it's not, the tree will be fine. It'll probably be better, because there are going to be people that are noticing the tree, watering it if it needs to be watered. And so long as you're not planting things that have got a massively deep root, the two things should be compatible. And you know, you see tree pits all over London. The trees are fine. They're like surrounded by, you know, hollyhocks or marigolds or something that is not going to be penetrating too deeply. Yeah, it's a tricky thing with the council, because it's like, it's often, I know the guerrilla gardeners would just say, just do it, without necessarily asking for permission, because once it's done, people can see the, you know, see the value of it. And if you, can't really say this off the record because it's going to be on the internet, but you know, if you ask permission, you could get told no. But if you do it anyway, then you've not done something that you're not supposed to have done.
Thanks so much. I just didn't want to hurt the tree. That would be awful.
Yeah, the main thing is not to put the soil up.
Okay.
Tree.
That's brilliant to know. Thank you. And I just wondered how your organisation reaches those difficult to reach groups. So I'm thinking particularly maybe of young people in my community, maybe BME people. A lot of the volunteering I've done over the years has been quite white and quite middle class, for example. And I just wondered how I could help kind of diversify it. I wondered what
I think going to the organisations themselves, so not expecting people to come to you, but you to find out what is on your doorstep and asking straightforwardly, what would they like to get from being engaged with the project? So you turn it around the other way.
Yeah.
I think they can often, what you want to try to avoid is seeing that the project is like a self-contained thing that people can't get into, and it's, you know, that is very much about doing outreach work out into the community. And yeah, almost like doing a sort of survey, or you know, a bit of trying to get feedback, trying to get people's input into it. And the more people feel that they've got a say in what is going on and that their voices are being listened to, obviously the more people are going to be interested in being part of it.
Okay, thanks so much. Thank you.
Oh, I think Joshua, you've muted yourself.
Oh yeah, no, I have muted myself. Thank you very much. Sorry, that's embarrassing. I've been doing this for weeks. I should have got. One last question from me. So post-lockdown, when perhaps the government advice on what we're supposed to be doing gets a little bit less confusing, if someone would like to get involved with Core Landscapes, what do they do? What's the first step for that?
Yeah, so basically, normally we'd have 2 work days, so Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Tuesdays are our community volunteering days. So the idea of that is that is for community volunteers to come and help look after the garden, and by doing so, learn more about horticulture. There's a slight caveat with that, is that it's not for complete beginner gardeners. So ideally, that's for people that have maybe done some short course somewhere else, or someone like yourself, Joshua, that's doing horticultural training somewhere else and they want sort of hands-on experience of a community setting, or that they've just done some of their own gardening already in their back garden or balcony or whatever. And the reason for that is because I can't offer one-to-one support, so it's very much kind of hit the ground running, just kind of be part of the team and get on with gardening. And then on Thursdays, we work with people that have been referred to us. So currently that is the Core Arts members, our Core Arts students. and I would be doing weekly structured workshops with a group on Thursday afternoons, and then when they've done a block of 10, they move to the Thursday morning sessions, which are the progression gardening sessions. And those sessions also do need support volunteers. So if there are community volunteers who are very experienced gardeners or have got experience of supporting other people in their learning, then they'd be eligible to apply to be one of our support volunteers.
Amazing. That's everything that I have. If we don't have any other questions, then I will let everybody get on with their Saturday afternoon. I've noticed that Chris has come back. Chris, I do actually have a gardener's question time question, a horticultural inquiry. If you are, it's to do with canners, and you are the BPCG canner expert. So I wondered if you had 2 seconds just before we sign off to answer my query.
Yeah, but I also would like to ask Nemone a little bit about staffing and about finance. So if we can come back to that as well. But what's the canner question?
The canner question is, my flower heads have abandoned ship. I suspect it's because the conditions on my balcony are not correct for anything. It's so windy up here, so unexpectedly exposed. I know that I can chop off the spikes right down at ground level, and there's some other stuff in the pot that's going to start growing up. But I wondered if I just deadhead the flower spikes, do I cut them all the way back down to the ground, or do I just deadhead them? Because I can see that there's there's at least what looks like another lateral shoot that looks like it might do its thing if I just chop it off down to there. Do I want to cut them all the way back to the ground, or can I just give them a haircut?
Which ones are they, Josh? Are they the canovas that we've decided?
Yes, yeah, they're the ones that we've got for sale on site. Quick plug.
So I mean, with all canners, you really need to examine the flower to see if it is really spent. You will get lateral shoots emerging from the side and below the inflorescence. And so an inflorescence can look dead, but it's got another side shoot coming. And one expects at least 3 from those spikes, and possibly 4 or 5. So it's well worth looking at it thoroughly first. But if it is completely spent, then it's of no use to the canner. And under natural circumstances, of course, it would die back eventually, and perhaps the rhizome might absorb some nutrients from it. But from a point of view of making the canner do what you want, it's much better to cut it down to the ground, and that'll encourage it to force other shoots up, and those then will flower. They're very, very reliable, these canovas, although they're rather highly hybridized. But there we are. We're just for the general audience, we moved to growing canners which are 30 to 40 centimeters high, because when we used to grow canners that are 50 to 70 centimeters high, people had a bit of a problem getting them home in 3-litre pots on the bus. So at least these, you can get a couple of these in a carry bag. And the other advantage is that we can grow them from seed and get them into flower in the first year. So they're wonderful things, but they are slightly over hybridized. But yeah, take a look at it.
Okay, right. I will do some more observation before I do anything drastic. Then, thank you very much. Right.
There was just a little point at which you mentioned irrigation. Mostly, your stuff is in containers, is it not?
Yeah.
And so you irrigate with drip irrigation on a long line, do you?
Yeah, it's a mixture. We either don't and just do it manually and just grow really tough drought tolerant things. Yeah, or we use the leaky hose system. What we try and do to sort of mitigate against that not being super green is that, I haven't got any photos of this, but we've got on the various different sites, we collected a lot of rainwater. So we'd have big bowsers collecting, 1,000 litres of rainwater, and we have solar panels. So we use the solar to create a pump that we can then pump the harvested water through a hose pipe so that we can use that manually.
The leaky pipe is really very green, actually. We managed to
the leaky pipe system is connected to the mains, but
yeah, but
we
even so, I mean, we've managed to reduce our water usage by 60% by installing leaky pipe around the garden, where previously we had unfocused irrigation. Anyway, I was just interested in how you did it.
I mean, it's obviously a big part, a big consideration with meanwhile projects, because obviously growing in containers isn't the best way of raising plants, but we also try to grow in really big containers, so they're not drying out so quickly, and quite deep containers as well. And we spend a lot of energy and thinking through the soil management of those as well. So we always have we tend to use a 50-50 mixture of topsoil and organic peat-free based compost, which we find is the best combination for most container growing, and with a big thick mulch on it as well.
Right. The other thing you mentioned, I didn't quite understand this, whether this related to Canning Town or whether it related to core landscapes overall, but you said you were able to get, I think, between 25 and 30% of your income from your plant sales?
Well, through a combination of plant sales and CSR, so that's the working with corporate volunteers.
Yeah.
So with the biggest,
where did the other 70% come from?
A mixture of grant funding and funding that is attached to people that have been referred to Core Arts. So if people are accessing personal budgets, or who are in some kind of other funding stream that is NHS connected through health and wellbeing sources. So it's a mixture. It depends who we're working with and what our remit is for each individual person that is coming to us. So roughly, very roughly, it's a third, like a third self-generated, a third sort of grant funding, and a third sort of via Core Arts.
What are the characteristics of the sites that make it viable for people with personal funding from the NHS to come to you? I mean, obviously the NHS wants to know what they're doing with their budget. Well,
that is through Core Arts. So because Core Arts have been working solely in this area for like 27 years, they've got a really, really good, well-established track record of service delivery. And Core Arts is a social business, basically. So they operate as delivering a service to the NHS or to other healthcare professionals, which it could be quite hard for a community garden to emulate that if they didn't have the infrastructure in place.
Yeah, I mean, it clearly makes a different sort of garden. I don't know if you're aware of Sydenham Garden.
Yeah. Well,
It's very different from us.
Yeah.
How different it is from you.
Yeah. So Core Landscapes is interesting because it's a mixture of the two. Because I work with people that have been referred to us, but also to the open community sector as well. So which Sydenham do as well. I mean, they're similar in that they've got kind of both sides of the project, and obviously there's crossover as well. You might be coming through a referral route one year, but you might be supporting somebody else the following year. It's a fluid.
Yeah.
It's a fluid thing.
We've managed to build a therapeutic offer, which has been supported by local funds, but we've not managed to convince GP surgeries or whichever NHS that we have. And it's probably correct, but it is something that we keep continually under review. But we're pretty proud about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that it's probably it's going to have a huge amount to do with the individuals working in those roles at any one time. Like if you've got advocates within the NHS who are in a position of influence and who really get the whole green care, green education for health and well-being, then it's obviously going to be easier for you to get that advocacy But if you're kind of working with people in that sector who don't really get it, then obviously you first and foremost, you've then got to convince people of the statistics of the value of the work that we're all doing. And you know, they're talking.
That was really going to be my final question, Nemone, and that is that you talked about a wide range of projects. I presume you do some research on that project, because presumably your funders want some sort of measure and expect you to be able to do that measurement. Are you doing that on all of your projects, and what sort of range of things are you doing?
As far as monitoring, you mean? Monitoring and reporting?
Monitoring and reporting.
Yeah, well, it totally depends from where we're getting the funding from. The funding source will be dictating what kind of monitoring that we need to do. So how detailed it is, how you know, how many questions we're having to ask people, what are those questions, what format it is. So it's not there's not a one consistent thing. The Warwick and Edinburgh mental health wellbeing scale is one that gets used quite a lot on community garden projects. I don't know if you use that at all at Brockwell.
I've had several attempts trying to introduce that, but I've got a lot of pushback so far. So,
yeah,
anyway,
that's. I mean, we use that one. Sydenham uses that one. I think St Mary's probably uses that one as well. But like the Hackney Learning Trust will have its own criteria. City Bridge will have its own criteria. The Lottery will have its own criteria. So you're on the ground. We basically try and get feedback all the time, continually, in the form of anecdotal stuff, surveys, reports, case studies. You know, if people are sending email comments or text comments or WhatsApp comments. So wherever and whenever we're getting feedback, we try and log it. And then once a year, wherever I'm at with whatever funding, I'll do a kind of almost like an audit of everybody who's attached to that project, and just sort of touch base with everybody, check that people are getting what they want to be getting from the project, getting any feedback as to any changes they want to see, or if they've got any particular ideas about anything. So it's a pretty much constant gathering of information all the time, and then hopefully wherever you're at with whatever funding bid, you've got that pool of information to sort of pull out whenever you need it.
Great. Well, I'm so sorry to have asked all the numbers and boring questions when everybody else was wanting to hear about horticulture.
Well, no, that's probably that probably is the most important question, is because that shows the value of your project. So, you know, if you're not getting that feedback, you've got no evidence that your project has any worth. I mean, we know it does, but we've obviously got to prove that it does.
Yeah. Very well. Thank you very much for answering my questions. Back to the horticulture, I'll probably close to the end, or maybe even overrunning. Gosh, timekeeping.
Oh, you're muted again, Josh.
Right, we are a little bit over time, so we are just going to do some very quick sort of any other business, and then we'll draw this to a close. This is probably the penultimate BPCG Gardeners Question Time. Next week, we are joined by some guests from the Orchard Project. So many people in London have trees in their back garden or in their sort of inhabited space that they have inherited, that they have no idea, you know, when they were planted and how they got there, and they have no idea how to look after them. So I would really recommend what may be the final BPCG Gardeners Question Time. Alice is going to be guest hosting for us, but it's going to be a really, really useful one. That's not the end for Gardeners Question Time, I hope. Once the situation in the outside world is a little clearer and a little less unnerving, we hope to resurrect this as a live event. It's something that we'll try and do every few weeks or once a month, or and there's also talk of a BPCG podcast, which is something that we have been talking about for a really, really long time. But I think there's actually, especially the number of really interesting volunteers that we get and the level of horticultural knowledge that we can share in this forum, we will move that across to something that's not Zoom and something that doesn't require everyone to give up their Saturday afternoons. Thank you so much, Nemone. This was fascinating and quite uplifting, actually, I found. So yeah, delighted to have you here this week, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That's it. So yeah, thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday afternoon. I'm going to bring the recording to a close, and we hope to see you again next week. Thanks.
Okay.